Hello and welcome to the News Club podcast, where we talk about the news and what to do about it. I'm with Debs again this week, and we're joined by Manasa Narayanan, a multi-platform journalist and researcher who works for The Citizens, a non-profit news/media organisation. And today in particular, we're going to start exploring a little bit more about the stories that were told about big tech and AI, and in particular, the misrepresentation of those stories as it relates to our general media landscape and how that misrepresentation then expands into other stories. But first, in a couple of sentences, who are you, Manasa?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be talking to both of you. I am a journalist, and I guess one thing to say to start with is maybe a small correction would be that I am now slightly a former journalist because I stopped working with the Citizens this month, and I'm kind of transitioning into academics soon. But yeah, for the last several years, I've been working as a journalist covering tech and politics, I guess more precisely, kind of topics that intersect the two. So things that kind of are both like capital P politics, like institutional politics, when we think about politicians' election campaigns, but also like small p politics, how people interact with tech in their everyday life. So, kind of all sorts of topics that arise from these various strands, I guess. And yeah, the work I'm now pursuing would also be kind of in the same vein of topics that I'm interested in, which is basically how tech comes to affect how we function in society, including politics.
Brilliant. All right, amazing. Thank you for the introduction. And now to the question I ask everyone, which is what should be headline news but isn't?
That's such like a big question and
It
one can
is.
go in so many directions. But I guess one of the things is maybe I'll give two answers to this and I'll try and be quick. But also the kind of moment we find ourselves in. It's not like I'm a journalist with a lot of clout or any celebrity status, but I guess any platform you get, you need to talk about things. It's I guess one of the things that should be headline is tech companies' complicity in violence around the world. So there is a predominantly lot of focus around business side of things, product side of things, and innovation side of things when it comes to big tech, quite at the cost of externalities. Not just externalities, actually, when it comes to like big tech's role in violence around the world and conflicts around the world, I guess the involvement is more direct. The stark examples currently is Israel's genocide of Palestinians. And I guess I would want it more headlined everywhere when we talk about big tech companies, that they get quite involved, because usually when people think about conflicts, they think about arms companies, companies that are selling, but I guess arms in a more physical sense. But there are lots of different companies. For example, American company called Palantir, which is like a surveillance tech firm, and it, for example, sells technologies to Israel and helps it basically to lock targets for killing in Gaza. So that is one. But also, we should also think about other big companies like Google. And one wouldn't predominantly think about Google or other companies as companies that help in war, but Google, Microsoft, and other companies provide cloud computing infrastructure. So that again is used by various repressive states to perpetuate violence. So I guess that's been on my mind quite a lot in terms of us talking about big tech. But the other kind of larger framing I would like from mainstream media platforms is to talk about how tech CEOs and AI companies are bullshitting us about AI. I don't know if I can use the word, but kind of claims about AI being super intelligent and different things, where things get quoted as CEOs saying without like any critical thinking or like probing around the claim. So it's reported as fact. They just put it on the codes and report it as fact. So I guess those are the two things. One thing I would see in the headline, and I guess the other is I don't want to see in the headline.
Exactly, no, absolutely. And I think we had a conversation a few episodes, a handful of episodes ago, where this matter of hallucinations kind of became more prominent, right? And being a big part of like what happens when you interact with AI. Like it's not always just getting facts from the internet. Like it is not set up to give you facts that are shared about the world. And there are different kinds of AIs, right? Like ChatGPT aside, in which you find that they are minimized for certain kind of things like hallucinations, and they're framed in different things in different ways.
And Courtney said in that episode as well that even the language of hallucinations still kind of personifies it. And actually, you should just talk about errors. They're just
Mm.
making mistakes.
They are simply, very simply. And actually, it's interesting also that you should have mentioned. Obviously, I thought this would be relevant, but yesterday I'm having a conversation with someone about Palantir actually, and the fact that you get actors like BlackRock giving like university societies a whole lot of money, like in the couple thousands, if not just under, to essentially be part of like, I guess, a strategy of theirs to actually recruit young programmers to work for those companies. And it was really interesting hearing the perspective of someone who is within, actually, well, within the field of cognitive science, in which like AI, or rather large language modules, is actually like a really big aspect of recent modeling within cognitive science. And they're talking to me about how there are so many people within this kind of informatics computing realm that like are evil. No, I think it wasn't an aim to kind of, well, but it was really fascinating actually seeing the fact that like the work that is done, for example, at Palantir, people that she knows that do internships. First of all, those internships, they can earn up to like 7K a month, which is an absurd amount of money. But secondly, what they end up doing is that they close off the different sections of the work that you're doing. You might be working on part A of of a project that might have part A all the way to Z, I don't know. And you have no idea what the other parts of the system are actually doing, which is to say the people that are also working on this technology are actually they're so cut off now, right? Their work has been so atomized to a point where they have no idea what the next step in the machine is. And I think a lot of what she was saying as well in terms of the interviews that they do are really about getting a sense of the extent to which an individual working for those companies would be willing to kind of compromise their morals. What do you value more? Certain profit? What do you value more? Being able to know this, that, and the other. And they actually make a really active effort to make sure that their employees are okay making really morally dubious decisions, such that we end up getting this kind of work produced. At the end of the day, I feel like it's always about structures, not necessarily individuals, right? But it really speaks to the kind of workforce that they're trying to foremost cultivate and make possible, to make this kind of work possible. So yeah, a lot of malicious, like I would go so far to say evil behavior coming from them.
It's very interesting you talk about employees, because I recently wrote something about Palantir, and I spoke to a former Palantir employee for it. And basically used to work drawing what is called kill chain diagrams for Palantir, which is basically like a visual diagrams that basically give the flow chart of how the technologies lead to, I guess, killings. But anyway, it's kind of interesting that he was got into Palantir without actually understanding what his role was. And even while he was working in the company, he couldn't understand the wholeness of what his work led to. And that kind of resonated with me when you said that they don't kind of, because they compartmentalize various processes, you don't really understand what your individual task is leading to. But I guess he left Palantir and now has become a whistleblower talking about the company. But the other aspect that I think about is the storytelling aspect, because companies like Palantir are very good at crafting narratives about the work they do and kind of sanitizing what they do in like either nationalistic tone. Okay, we are helping states kind of, maintain their national security. We are protecting Americanness. That's what Palantir would say. Or we are doing it to against bad people, against bad actors, and we are giving it to states. So they craft really like smart narratives, especially for young employees and when they go to universities, to tell them and entice them into coming to these cool sounding companies.
Well, yeah, I mean, for example, the way that Israeli government ministers will say, like, we've conducted this war in the most humane way possible, right? There's an added element of like, oh, yeah, I know that this is to kill people, but they would die anyway. And this way, it's going to be really precise, and it's going to be the exact person that was meant to die, and there will be less collateral damage, right? And I do, there's so much cultishness within Silicon Valley, right? And it's in some ways, it's just a logical progression of general like corporate cultishness, but taken to this new level. I mean, Peter Thiel, one of the founders of Palantir, I mean, he's a very, very committed to this like rationalist worldview. I mean, We should get someone on to do a whole episode on that because it's actually mad. Yeah, from what I understand is going on there, and it's interesting that it's obviously it will be playing out with young people in the UK who are being recruited into these firms, is that you're also being told a story about how your work is contributing actually to the transcendence of humanity, right? Like, especially if you're working in AI, then you're going to help achieve AGI. And actually, you're part of this massive race of good against evil. You've got to create the good AGI before the bad AGI happens. And you can see the kind of cultural, it seems to have a lot of cultural roots in gaming as well. It's like you're then placed in this kind of hero character, and like everything that you're doing in your life is very aggrandized, while also, and then the stakes are extremely high, but put in this completely false place, right? It's like, of course, the stakes of your work actually are extremely high. Like you doing your kill chain like this or like that would result potentially in a different person dying. But instead, they've got this idea of like, that's not where the stakes are. The stakes aren't this real material thing that's constantly happening. The stakes are this fantasy about transhumanism, about, in some of the like more extreme rationalist philosophies, they're like, well, we have to create the ultimate good, not just for all humans today or in the future, but all consciousnesses. And because we think that AI is going to be conscious, actually, we have to factor in their well-being in the future more than we're thinking about the lives of like a person in Gaza right now.
It's kind of one of the more frustrating bits, even with how mainstream media then comes to cover some of these things, right? Because the tech companies are quite clever when they come out with these statements, and often they are also negative tones. So they would come out and say, "Oh, AI is going to kill out all humanity. It will do this and that, and it's a risk, just like pandemics." And mainstream media would just put all these headlines out there, just saying tech CEOs warn, and there is a slight quote there, and they would just reproduce it in the headline as if it were fact. But they are quite smart in the sense that even if it's negative framing, they are essentially telling you the technologies we're building are powerful. They are so powerful that, all these people, you should come and invest with us because we are building something really good. And you should come to us because we will do it. But like you say, the good AGI and the bad AGI and different things, you should come and invest with us because we are the good players of all the players that exist, right? So yeah, it is a lot of major storytelling game, and it's just very frustrating with mainstream media coverage, because then there would be one line somewhere in the article and saying, but there are critics who say that currently does not have the capacity, or there is no research that suggests that AI can become superhuman or super intelligent. That'll be one line somewhere, but yeah.
Yeah, kind of what we've touched up on there is somewhat related to your work and what your work tells us about the world. There's these narratives that then end up cropping up to misrepresent said world. So more onto that, like why do you think they take hold, and whose interests do they serve?
I guess it's different kind of. I don't think all of the intentions are malicious necessarily. I think there is one level of, obviously, some of the journalistic outlets, the way they apply is, for example, FT or different kind of more businessy financial side of things. They come at it from a very different perspective, and given how their usual reportage is, they report on it in a certain fashion. But the other kind of major problem is most journalists are well aware, I suppose, in terms of, one, what is the right approach, vocabulary, and historical context to set some of this tech news in. And second, what research exists in the space and what researchers who are working on AI ethicists, for example, are saying necessarily. So someone who's also doing reporting like breaking news, who's usually is going to be the one who's going to write tech CEOs say this and that, rather than say a tech reporter necessarily who's going to do a more in-depth kind of feature later on, may not necessarily be aware about what the different views are within, say, the AI space and what different researchers are saying. So I guess it's a combination of not knowing enough. Obviously, there are commercial motivations also, and the way things get reported. Obviously, we had our traditional media barons, and now we have kind of the tech media barons taking over news outlets. So, and also social media spaces, and then they have come to censor speech and tell you how and what you can report on certain things. I'm thinking about Jeff Bezos with Washington Post, for instance. So what you can say now in the Washington Post, maybe on AI, might be restricted. Who knows? So there are a few different, obviously, there are traditional logics that govern, right? Business logics. But yeah, there's also this, the space is new, because even 5 or 6 years ago, there wouldn't be a lot of journalists who'd be doing a dedicated beat where they were covering tech and AI in this fashion. So you'd be doing, product reviews or tech. There were tech reporters before, they'd be doing product reviews. So there were a few journalists who were doing internet culture journalists who were writing about specific niche things happening online. But as a big beat, it's become a beat now. And so I think you're still finding a footing in terms of how to contextualize everything. So there's that too. And obviously there is like stuff about just simple business logics about clickbait, right? So putting something AI on the headline and saying something like extinction will lead to a lot of clicks rather than a more nuanced take on what AI could or couldn't do. So yeah, that's a kind of a mixed bag answer, but yeah.
Absolutely. Debs, I was wondering also, like, what would be an effective way of actually portraying this kind of information? How can we convey to people in general, right, the extent of like misinformation, not just misinformation, but like the impact and the actual impact, to actually convey what like the reality is of this as it pertains to big tech?
I mean, the thing with all of these technologies is that they're not just a story that we're hearing about, they're part of our day-to-day lives. And actually, the big reasons why the narrative, the narrative around the environmental impacts of AI is, has its specifics, but it's also a continuation of the narratives of the environmental impacts of smartphones and of computers. And, there's very obvious reasons why those things are pushed to the background, because it's actually almost impossible to live in a society like the UK right now if you don't own these technologies. Literally, aspects of the state will not be accessible to you if you can't get on the internet regularly. You are excluded culturally. You won't be able to make, we've all got that friend who won't use WhatsApp, and then they're in the Signal chat and you have to keep remembering that they're not in the WhatsApp chat. One day, maybe, hopefully that will be me. But like, there's this level of like, these things are very, very embedded in our lives, that then means that there's a huge cognitive dissonance when you are really trying to take on board the fact that you're participating in this destructive system all day, every day. And with AI, I just think the more important question, I think, is really about how AI is being embedded in people's work. And how in people's workplaces the conversation about the ethics takes place there. Because if it becomes completely the norm that in any kind of sort of computer-based work there is an expectation that these technologies are just going to be part and parcel of how you use things, it's just going to be more and more difficult to really think about and take into account or even take seriously the hugely destructive impacts on them, because you're just tied into it. It becomes yet another ethical dilemma, yet another kind of ethical consumer choice that you're struggling with. Like, am I going to shop in a big supermarket or my local shop, or we know that when things are happening, when it feels like the ethical question is happening on an individual level, it's just intolerable. So it has to be approached in this more collective way. And I think resisting its normalization within the workplace. And to be honest, in my experience so far in the kind of work that I do, I am not seeing it being a time saver at all. That may the technologies are developing, but it's more likely that it becomes used as a tool by managers and bosses to expect more work in less time, even though it's not really actually a functional time saving. And obviously this also applies to journalists, and journalists who are in this space also being tied into using these technologies and pressured to use these technologies.
There are also a few other things, particularly with journalists, you could very simply do, which is one, if a tech CEO comes out and makes a statement, you don't have to report it. Like every statement they make, you do not have to publish it, The other thing is also the aspect of inevitability, right? And I agree with Debs about how difficult it is to not operate in this space. But with particularly some technologies like LLMs and like chatbots, it is quite possible currently to not be part of them as well, right? But there is a certain narrative of inevitability that is being pushed currently in by these tech companies to say you cannot have a world without them. So you might as well know how to use them effectively. And so the inevitability is also seen in the reporting, because the reporters mimic the same lines about, well, this technology is here, we can't do anything about it, so you might as well accept it. So maybe if you are reporting on the subject, don't assume that that has to be the case, right? And the more kind of technical aspect is, maybe if someone's starting out and wants to report on AI, is to understand AI infrastructure a bit better. Because if you sit down and actually see what the current LLMs are doing, all they're doing is language processing at a big scale, right? So what they're doing is predicting what the next set of strings letters should be. So then you basically understand that they are not rationally thinking or even applying logics to produce answer, but they are mimicking patterns. And once you get that, when some CEO comes and says something about super intelligence, can be like, there is a lot between where we are here and that being super intelligent. So then you think about how you want to report about it, right? So again, that's another thing. Maybe we should, as journalists, also understand kind of the technologies themselves at a more technical level better. So then we know when they are not being, I guess, correct. And tech CEOs are not telling us, I guess.
It also, I guess, speaks to who you want to be talking about it as well, right? There are many people that work within those fields that could articulate with much more depth what exactly is happening behind the scenes, right? And to give you a bit more of a realistic idea of what to expect from said technology. The other thing that I know I wanted to talk about with you today, just generally in the realm of misrepresentation and journalism within the recent political environment in the UK, with right-wing rallies, right-wing riots, in which, yeah, it's a very harmful narrative, one that is built on a history of racism in the UK, and one that is almost using this as a recent outlet to be able to kind of expel hate. How would you compare also like the way that journalism is now approaching these stories as well?
Well, first, it's been quite painful to watch. But yeah, I think maybe I'll keep it more to my expertise and say things more specifically about the way these things are covered and also the tech perspective. But I guess generally speaking, I guess it's anyone who's lived in the UK long enough, and I only lived here 5 years and I know this well, is that there are just different pockets of the UK media industry, particularly the tabloid industry, that is just infamous for the way it reports on things. And so we always know that Daily Mail is going to run that headline, Daily Mail is going to have a certain framing around it to push kind of like it's whatever gets their impressions, whatever gets on the nerves of people. It's kind of how they would frame it. In terms of mainstream coverage, it's the fact that it's been abysmal in the lead up to some of these protests as well. Because I remember a few weeks ago watching like a Sky News segment, and it was basically a correspondent who had gone to one of the seaside towns, I guess, that had been left behind, that was struggling economically. And the whole one package, was this particular correspondent going to one person and talking to them about um, immigrants in the town. And this person didn't like having immigrants in the town and was saying stuff. And then the camera cut from this person and then spanned to the beach and then went to particularly, ethnic minority, well, visibly non-white looking people, and zoomed in, zoomed out, zoomed in, zoomed out of people just on the beach who are not white. And as the person was speaking, to give obviously this image that obviously these people are here and these people are, on our beaches, and there are quite a few of them. And then this person who has a problem with immigrants, interview finishes, and that's the package. So no other person from the town is spoken to. And this is the package they show to talk about the immigration debate, right? So This happened quite in the lead up to the protests and kind of the rally we saw in London that was kind of organised by Tommy Robinson. So yeah, it's been quite bad in a lot of different ways. Obviously, there are alternative media outlets. There's Novara, different kinds of places that have been trying to reframe the narrative in terms of how they talk about some of these subjects. But specifically coming to like tech, I don't know if you saw there was a headline in The Guardian a couple of days ago, and it was about Musk's Grok AI bot falsely suggests police misrepresented footage of far-right rally in London. And this was basically the headline talking about the rally in London. And while the headline's about Grok AI misrepresenting something, the whole piece was about the fact that Tommy Robinson, who organized, who's like for people who don't know, if you don't know him, you are in some heavenly world and that's nice for you. But he's like far right personality in the UK, and he organized kind of the London rally and was speaking. And basically, Elon Musk was streamed at this rally, basically. And that was what the piece was talking about. And the AI aspect was just one aspect of what was mentioned in the piece, and was barely mentioned in the piece, but that made the headline. But the other thing while covering these rallies is, I guess, not talking about various contextual factors that lead to something like the violence we're seeing and the rallies we're seeing. And it is not AI. And I would also say the slight technological determinism we see, right? Like social media, like if you see the far right riots that happened in 2024, there were a lot of headlines that ran saying social media caused disinformation on social media caused riots. And while I think social media did play a role, I think what it does is takes the complexity out of the situation to talk about, well, mainstream media's failure, the fact that there are political establishment figures like Nigel Farage promoting violence. There's other kinds of local actors. There are also far-right influencers online, right? So it's a combination of things. So the other thing, while these things get reported, is really simplistic narratives that get driven about things. And also, it is annoying also because I don't like most of these tech companies, but because the government kind of parrots some of these far-right lines, including the Labour government and Keir Starmer. And then when things like this happen, they're like social media companies. It's because of them that this violence actually took place on the streets. So they kind of pass the burden on to it to not kind of talk about the other kinds of problems that are there. So I guess that's kind of my take on the general coverage and also the kind of tech coverage that comes with some of these riots.
I'm trying to find a really good article that I read. It's from one of the migrant organizations. I'll try and find it and then because I think it's a really good piece for showing like some of the missing context. And it's basically someone being like, well, they're saying that this is an impossible situation. How can we house them? And it's like this complete erasure of housing policies for asylum seekers and refugees over the last 30, 40 years. So the person writing it is someone who came over from former Yugoslavia in the 90s as a refugee. It's like, there was dispersal plans. There were there's a whole set of different things that have been used, including obviously even right now housing Ukrainian families with local people who are willing to give them a home. So yeah, there's this like, again, in terms of like the wider narrative and what is not being spoken about, it's like there have been solutions to this, and they're continually written out of the story.
Yeah, exactly. Also, like these are systemic problems, right? When the immigration debate is usually had on mainstream platforms, it's like, okay, the number of immigrants that have come into this particular area has risen from this number to this number, from this year to this year. But what about the context of factors that has led to the other problems surrounding it? It's not the fact that you can show some number increase to blame it on immigrants, right? So yeah, I completely agree.
I guess there's two elements here, right? Like you say, there's a structural element in terms of like, what can we do? What can we expect? What can we push for? And what stories do we want to start seeing more? And I guess on the more individual level of journalists, how should they be responding to avoid amplifying these sort of dynamics, would you say? And it's a hard one because I feel like at the end of the day, the onus doesn't ultimately lie with individual journalists. But like, again, on those more structural levels, like how do we come to reframe these narratives in a way that speaks more to truth?
Wish I knew. I don't. There are a few things, right? And obviously, you're right about individual journalists. Also, because some of the headlines I talked about, also for people not in the industry, journalists usually don't get to pick their headlines. It's usually editors, sub editors. So don't blame the journalists necessarily. But yeah, structurally, I think it's. I guess we have to change where money comes from. That's a very big thing. And I don't know how that would change when we're already struggling for a lot of money in terms of. I guess maybe this is also, I guess, a moment in the journalism space where I think we should then rethink how and where money comes from and what we dictate our editorial policies on. Currently, it's the fact that some obvious. I mean, this is not news to anyone. It's the fact that a lot of these mainstream news outlets are big corporations with various governing factors. And how does one change that? I do not know. But I guess maybe we just build on the independent news media space in a way that it grows more stronger. So that's what I can come up with currently, because I have no idea how these corporations would change the logics they would work on, right? Because it's just they work on a money logic and a different set of principles, I suppose. So there are things we can do to strengthen the independent media like ecosystem, but that's also difficult given the resources we have. And this, as a side note, has led me to think about big tech in this context, because obviously a lot of independent media outlets are struggling currently because of how big tech has kind of taken away their revenue in various senses, right? So introduction of AI in particular has meant that traffic to various news sites has decreased recently. Maybe this is a moment where the independent news media ecosystem comes together. I know that there is currently policy that's going through with the CMA currently, which is the Competitions and Markets Authority in the UK, around how big tech companies basically compensate news outlets for their news and the value of their news. So hopefully, if we win something in that fight, independent news outlets gets some resources and we strengthen that space so people come to it. And I feel like the more and more these mainstream outlets, I don't know actually, I was going to say the more and more repugnant they get, maybe people would be driven away from them, but I don't know because contentious things do work. So maybe we need to get clever at how to do, I'm not saying contentious, but interesting debates in a reasonable fashion that drives people to us for conversation. And this also includes maybe a side comment about how maybe more progressive independent outlets need to incorporate more voices, so that they don't keep preaching to the converted, I suppose. But it's all difficult questions, and I don't have
It really is.
great
And
answers.
yeah, I think like you say, like no one person can necessarily like give you the full answer. But I mean, funny enough, what you just touched on is quite relevant, I think, to a lot of the things that we do re independent media, isn't that right, Debs?
Yeah, I mean, there's a consortium, or like an alliance of the different independent media publishers associations. So the Independent Media Association, Independent Community News Network, and the Independent Publishers Alliance, who've all come together and currently trying to do some research on the members with the intention of then going to negotiate with Google under the legislation that you were just talking about, this law that was passed last year, which is supposed to try and create a bit more of a fair playing field in spaces where big tech companies have a monopoly. So Google is expected to be designated as having this monopoly in October, and then there will be a kind of legal backstop that means that they have to negotiate, even with people that they would right now be like, well, you're just like small fish, we don't want to talk to you. They will be obligated to do that. And yeah, the hope is to bring in resources for that sector. And the fact is that in the independent media space, especially where you've got people operating in this very sort of non-corporate, non-profit way, this money will go really far. It will go much further than it would if it was going to, if it was going to Murdoch or whatever. It will have a much bigger impact. So yeah, the hope is to get something out of Google to, and what we're thinking about is not just So financial compensation for the value that has been created for Google by having this news and information that they can link to, but also to think about what are the non-financial remedies, which could also look like getting Google to support the creation of non-corporate tech that could be a kind of underpinning for this independent media sector so that you're reducing your dependence on them.
That's incredible. And thank you for sharing that, Debs. Well, we've mentioned it every once in a while, but I think it's actually really helpful to have a proper overview of what it is that is happening and to have people know that this is very much something that you perhaps should have in your headlines and you should be looking to and checking out and ultimately supporting independent media outlets and knowing that they exist so that you can receive your news and information from such a myriad of different people in different ways. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to wrap up with the last two questions. First one being, what would you bring to the online news club? So for context, this Saturday we're going to host an online news club, which is kind of the format that we have for how we kind of get people into a room, start talking about the news and more importantly, what to do about it. So what would you bring? Is there any sources, publications, certain people, movements, subjects, food?
There is a lot, and I think I wanted to do this is there are a lot of journalists and outlets that are doing tech and AI investigations in particular really well. And so while I've gone on a slight rant about the things that have not gone well, there are really hardworking people, outlets out there. And I guess I could give a shout out to a couple. But one of the things, if you are a journalist specifically, is to check out the Pulitzer Center's AI Accountability series / network. So it's kind of, you can go and have a really, really well-informed, good kind of foundation on how AI actually functions and what kind of reporting you can do with it and what kind of investigations you can do with it. So that's really cool. And it's basically one of the people who kind of has worked on creating this program is Karen Howe, who's got a very best-selling book out there currently about OpenAI, and Sam Altman. So you should check that out too. And I guess the other thing is there are outlets like, I would say, 404 Media, which do really good kind of tech investigations and big tech side of reporting. So that's something to check out. And obviously, The Citizens is where I used to work. And we used to do loads of different things, not just in the journalism space, but the campaigning space. So around big tech. So those are folks you should probably also check out. So those are, I thought I would keep it to the theme of what I spoke about. So yeah.
No, brilliant. Thank you so much for those recommendations. I think they're very useful as well if people are trying to set up their news clubs, right? Like it's good to know where to go to and why and whatnot. And the last thing being, what is the one thing everyone should do leading up to 2029? So the context for this question is in 2029, we may live, and you could say that we already are, living in a Europe and UK that's run by authoritarians. So in light of this fact, what is the one thing that we should all be doing?
I guess to journalists, two things. One is embrace nuance in your reporting. And particularly in the independent media space, it's just there is a lot out there, and even now AI produced lot that would come out. And so what we lose out and are losing out is on context, on depth. So yeah, embrace nuance, even if people tell it's slightly boring journalism. And the other thing would be more like kind of a general advice would be have more conversations, have more in-person conversations, have conversations with people you disagree with as well. And sometimes it's, I kind of resist against the idea that there are two kinds of people, good and bad, and you should push away people you slightly find problematic all the time. This is not to say that there can be some truly toxic people and you don't need to keep them in your life. But generally speaking, there is like a spectrum of people, and some people you might disagree on a few things, but it's always worth talking and discussing. And I've always found that you get a better sense of the other side, but you also humanize each other a lot. And I think we are lacking the spaces to do that. So I guess, yeah, talk more.
Talk more and be kind to each other in doing so. Couldn't agree more. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much as well, Debs, for coming along to yet another episode. I promise I'll put the onus on Shivers one of these weeks. And yeah, check out News Club at newsclubuk_ on our socials. Episodes coming out every week and a few little clips. If your little dopamine deficient brain needs a little bit of content to consume. And yes, any links, any relevant details we'll absolutely have in the description of this podcast. Thank you guys, and we'll leave it there. And I'll catch you soon next week. Bye.